What's up, my friend? Welcome back to another video. So in this one, I wanted to share my complete mixing process with you from start to finish. Now, this is a track that I've already mixed. So what I'll do is kind of break down and retrace the steps that I took to get to this polished final mix. And if you want to see a mix that I actually do in real time, I've actually done a small video series on that on the channel already, and maybe I'll do more content on that in the future. You can let me know down below in the comments. But first of all, let me just walk through my process with you really quickly. So before I start mixing at all, and by the way, this works for really any genre of music. Mine is more orchestral pop, but if you're doing rock or pop or metal or really anything, I think this process can also work for you. So yeah, before I actually get into the mix itself, the first thing I do is I make sure everything is organized and grouped properly. And so with organization, I mean color coding, I mean making sure that the elements are in the same groups together. So the yellow stuff, in this case, I treat it all as orchestral. From the string crescendo all the way down to the electric cello, these are all elements of the orchestra, as you can see. Then below that, I have percussion, which is basically drums and cinematic hits and stuff like that. I kind of labeled that in brown. Here I have guitars and stuff in blue. And then I have basses and subs in red, and then extras like pianos and choirs in green. So of course you don't have to follow my color method, do whatever you like, but that's just what I do for an easy mix that I can navigate around it very, very quickly. So after that's done, after that's the first step, then what I do next is I do a static mix. So I literally open up my mixer window, I take and highlight all of my tracks, okay? Then I grab one fader and I drag it down to the very, very bottom so that every fader goes down to the bottom. Now, naturally, this means that you can't hear anything. So there's zero signal coming out through the mix. And the whole purpose of a static mix is so you rebalance the entire mix from scratch. So you literally take the most important element, and in this case, I would recommend going from the loudest section of the piece. So in this case, that would be the final chorus. Let's see where if I can find it. Actually, I think it's here right after the bridge. Let me just play 2 seconds of that. My heart's beating, a miracle that I'm still breathing, a chance for me to find my meaning today. Right, so this is the final chorus, and you can hear that there's more instruments in there. It's quite large. If you've heard the tune, it starts off quite quietly. But basically, you go from the loudest section where there's more instruments involved. You find the most important instrument of that section. So in my case, it would be the vocal, and you drag that up to a decently low level so that you don't get close to clipping on your stereo bus. So in that case, it would probably be, let me see, where's my final chorus? Yeah, right here I have my 2 chorus vocals. So I took this vocal, I dragged it up to around -3.4 or, around 0, depending on where that double is. In this case, yeah, it's this one right here. That's where the most important element is. And then I take every other vocal around it and drag it up to balance around that main vocal so that I balance the vocal section itself first, and then I move on to the next sections. Maybe that is the acoustics, like the orchestral stuff. I make sure that is balanced in according to the vocal, so it doesn't overpower it. Then I move on to the guitars, the percussion, the basses, and everything else. And this process is probably the most fun part for me because I actually hear the balancing start to come to life, right? Once I have that most important element up, then I start to move everything up bit by bit, and it takes me about 15-20 minutes just to make sure the balance is nice and set for at least this section. I can always go back and automate the rest, but I want to get one section really nicely balanced, okay? Here's also where I'll do the panning as well. So maybe the main vocal's up the middle, but I have specific harmonies that I want to pan one side to the next to create a wider sound. Maybe the orchestral stuff you don't want to hard pan because that's less natural for orchestral music. So I kind of pan that slightly left, slightly right, and so on and so forth. And with pop music, EDM, whatever, you can be a bit more severe with your panning. So after the static mix, then I move on to the top-down mixing. This is where we actually start doing the processing for the sounds themselves. And so here you can see on the stereo bus, I initially put an EQ, and the whole point of this is to do a very light EQ curve in, every so often, like for some of these EQ bands. So I cut off some of the low end. So you can see that curve down there, just getting rid of those below 20 frequencies that you can't really hear anyway. Then I took out some of this low mid stuff here. You hear that sort of boxy sort of sound in there in the 400s.
and then boosting some of this high end. Anywhere from the 4 to 8, 9K register, I feel like is a pretty good area where you can boost some of the air and some of the highs. So the point of this is not to create huge drastic changes in your mix, because you can do that at the individual level for certain instruments, but it's sort of like sweet little enhancements to get the mix up and running very, very quickly. After my EQ, I do a little bit of compression as well. I really like Logic's stock compressor, so I usually keep the ratio pretty low so it doesn't squash the mix really heavy, and I keep the threshold relatively low as well, so the mix isn't like pumping all the time. It's just little bits here and there. So you see the needle moving very slightly there. Go to the downbeat here. Right, so very, very slight movements, and I'm just doing the makeup gain by 0.5 decibels to make up any gain that might have been lost. In this case, it's probably boosting up even more signal that's actually being lost, but that's okay. So again, just keeping the dynamics of the mix under control very, very slightly, because again, we can always go a little bit more extreme at the group level, the bus level, or down in the individual level if we wanted to do that. Then one of my favorite plugins that I add in next is Greg Wells Mix Centric from Waves. And this is a one knob plugin that you can turn up. It brightens up the mix, darkens the mix, whatever you want to do. But basically it brightens up the mix. So let me turn off the plugin and then turn it back on.
My heart's beating, a miracle that I'm still breathing, a chance for me to find my meaning today.
Right, so huge difference actually to my ears. The percussion is the element that really has the biggest difference for me. It really just opens up. It's a little cleaner. The snare is more punchy, and the overall mix opens up very slightly. So really, really awesome plugin that you might consider cheating. I personally don't, but basically do whatever you need to do to get the mix done as quickly as possible, I say, and get good results out of it that you're happy with. Then usually I'll move down to the group track level after this. Usually I'll save the limiter or the mastering plugin to the very ends, but just to show you that really quickly. So I'm using Ozone 10 here, and I just use the AI mastering chain. So I go through the loudest section after the static mix is done. I ask the plugin to give me basically a default sort of mastering chain that they think is good to polish up the mix, right? So here they recommended to boost the low end a little bit, boost the high end. The mids were pretty much already good, and then the imaging, you can see it kind of decreased the width a little bit, increased it in certain bands, some dynamic EQ happening, and then a maximizer just to boost up that overall volume. But whatever you do, you want to boost up that overall volume to have it more match the commercial standards, and then you can always use a reference track later when you're doing a proper master for a full album, for example, to get everything up to a standard level that you're looking for. But after the top-down mix is done for the stereo out, then I move down to the group track level. So here you can see I have a perk bus, a background vocals bus, an pad bus, and I have other ones here as well. So you see the lead vox, right? Everything is bussed over to this one here for the lead vocals. I have a bunch of stuff here for my vocal chain, EQ, compressor, de-esser, Greg Wells voice centric, Valhalla Room for reverb, and then Echo Boy for a little bit of delay. But essentially, buses are really, really useful because you can apply processing to an entire group of tracks instead of copying and pasting plugins on the individual tracks, which is nice. So yeah, then I move down to the group level, and then finally the individual track level if anything is needed. So I'm just taking a look here. Here you can see I felt like the solo cello needed a bit of extra reverb, so I put a bit of Valhalla Room on there, 22%. And then that's the majority of the processing, right? And this process usually takes me between half an hour to an hour or so, because I'm really trying to listen for anything that I can sweeten up more, anything that's sticking out that I need to push down, any individual elements that need help. Like I'll address that all here. And then afterwards, the final step really is just automation. So I go through, I take a look at which elements are still a bit too loud or too quiet and need to be featured a little more, and I'll draw in automation curves to make sure that happens. And of course, automation does not just apply for volume, but also for panning, solo, mutes, or whatever plugins you have on your track. You can automate those as well. Here you can see on my lead vocal bus, I actually automated the Valhalla room. So over the course of the track, I wanted the lead vocals to have more and more reverb, basically to simulate the expansion of the track going into space, feeling larger than life, and then decreasing at the very end when the intimacy comes back in. So big, 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 and then big explosion, come back down.
I'll live my life.
And you see there, the reverb is very, very low there. Right? So automation is extremely powerful because if you don't, you're bound to have little gaps or little bumps in the listening experience. It's not quite as pleasurable for the listener, and you don't want that, right? So make sure you go in, close your eyes, listen through the track, and then adjust any micro dynamic things or effects, plugin stuff you need to do just to ensure that the listening experience is consistently smooth and enjoyable the entire way through. And that's my entire process. So just to quickly recap, step number 1 is organization, color coding, and grouping. And during this process, I will also make sure the buses are created. So I'll select my tracks, for example, all the lead vocals, bus them over to my lead vocal bus, same with the background vocal bus, etc. And those all lead out to the stereo out, which is right here, right? Step number 2 is doing a static mix, taking all the tracks, dragging them down to the very bottom so there's zero signal, taking the most important element and putting that up at a healthy low level because I can always boost later, right? And making sure every element is balanced around that main element so we get a nice consistent mix for that big section. Then I move on to the static mix, the top-down mixing where I apply processing to my master fader first just to get that mix sweetened up and the majority of the mix finished, right? So very broad strokes here, nothing crazy, but just EQ, compressor, little mix sweetening, and then the limiter I don't do quite at this stage yet. I do that the last, but you can see I've done it here because I've already mixed and mastered this tune. So after this is done, then I process the group tracks and then the individual tracks if I need to do anything there, EQ, compression, reverb, delay, whatever it might be. And then after that's done, then I move on to the automation. So any final volume adjustments, panning, reverb, whatever it might be, draw in your automation curves. And of course you can zoom in to really allow for fine adjustments there, of course. And then finally, then I put on the mastering plugin, in this case, Ozone 10 from iZotope. Okay, so it's pretty simple. That's my full process in a nutshell. And again, if you want to see a full technical breakdown, like if you want to see me actually do this from start to finish, I've done this on the channel already in a playlist, or I can do more of this again in the future. Just let me know down below. I'm more than happy to entertain any requests you might have. But that being said, I hope that was helpful. Thank you again very much for watching. And if you're interested in my full start to finish process for creating music in general, like coming up with a first idea, how I progress through that to get the ideas down, flesh it out, mix and master it, and then finally release it, I have a full complete workshop that I've done called the Complete Composers Framework. You can check that out down below in the description, and I want to give you complete free access to that. And it's an on-demand workshop, so you can watch it anytime, and I hope you really find it valuable and useful for your productions. So thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you in the next video, and I'll see you very soon. Take care.